Welcome to my madness. I'm Nobody, and we're going to be talking about reality and perception. And it's such a vast topic, so where to begin? I figured I would begin with the beginning and start with looking at the human condition and maybe try to suss out a little bit as to why human beings are the way that they are. Mostly, I guess, the negative side as opposed to the positive side. Why are we greedy? Why are we lazy? Why are we this and that? And how come, we feel empty and yearning and unsatisfied and all that rot? So I thought it might be good to use our imaginations. If you're not the kind of person that wants to think about things, then this is not the kind of show for you, and that's fine. But if you like to puzzle on things, contemplate things, then this is definitely the place to be. A lot of things can be figured out just by imagining them, and unfortunately our society, the American society as a whole, seems to think imagination is stupid and childish and a waste of time. And yet the people who excel and the people who are considered geniuses are those that are adept at using their imaginations. They have great imaginations. They can see things, and by being able to imagine things, it's easier for them to bring them into manifestation. Some of you may recognize that idea of visualization, bringing things into manifestation, as a principle of what a lot of people call magic. Some people just call it creative visualization. I've seen a lot of videos on YouTube now that are focusing on imagine it and bring it into being, and well, that's definitely a part of it, and that's how human beings create, is we imagine things first, and then we do everything we can to manifest that imagination into reality. Some things are easier than others, but I strongly believe imagination is absolutely necessary to our functionality, and that it's pretty much beaten out of us by society, in the sense that we're told to grow up and stop pretending or get real and this and that. Like, I just don't understand it. I just don't get why we shit on imagination so hard. But if you want to enjoy my insanity, then imagination is going to be necessary to do so. And that's what I'm asking all of my potential viewers to do, is to take a moment and just think, imagine, picture, put yourself in a situation or into what I'm talking about. If you're unwilling to use your imagination, I wish you the best of luck, because it's really difficult to maneuver through life without being able to visualize things, come up with new ideas, and just generally go through day-to-day life, not like a robot. So what I'm going to be asking you to imagine is, we need to go back to the beginning and imagine an infant. I mean, we can skip the conception part, although some people prefer to just focus on imagining that, but that's besides the point. If we start from the moment of conception, i.e. when the egg meets the sperm, or vice versa, that very moment, if you can imagine and picture it, at that very moment, a being is beginning to form, from that instant on. But throughout that whole process and through to the process of birth, it's important, and it'll be more important later on as I progress and start to get more complex and more difficult to imagine ideas out there. But it's very important to understand that from the moment of conception, we have an awareness of another entity and of time, and just we have the rhythm of the heartbeat, the pumping of the blood, the sound of breathing, the fluid around us, and just the energy of the person that we're inside when, we're just a little microscopic blip. But whether or not you can argue the cells are aware doesn't matter. As soon as awareness begins, if it begins in the womb, which is most likely, as soon as that occurs, we are aware that we are not alone. So from the very get-go, we are aware that we're not alone. And like I said, it's going to come in, become more important later on. Right now, it's just throwing it out there that from the very start, we know that we are not alone. We have an awareness of something other than ourselves, something larger than ourselves. So then we progress, and as we develop, here we are in what most people have assumed to be a comfortable, perfect temperature, great place where we don't have to do a thing. It's what a lot of people use to describe the most comfortable place. Oh, it's like returning to the womb. It's you're buoyant, you're not using muscles that much, unless you want to. You're curled up, warm, fed, essentially clothed. Sheltered, I suppose, is a better term than clothes, but so it's ideal, and then we outgrow it, and then we're born, and that's a pretty traumatic experience, as anybody who's witnessed childbirth knows or has gone through it. And usually, you smack the baby and they start crying, and of course they're not happy. Most babies do cry. It's considered a rarity and an oddity, and I suppose some cultures are concerned about it when they don't. But it's considered normal for a healthy baby to cry furiously. And understandably, we've been taken out of that perfect bedroom, wrapped up sleeping situation, and now, and many people have spoken of this, there's no doubt about it. And now we're freezing cold because there's a drastic temperature change, there's a bunch of strange people, there's all kinds of light that we didn't have to deal with, there's all kinds of things that have now changed that we're very uncomfortable with. Now, before we go any further, I'd like to make some comments about time and our perception of time. Now, there may be varying aged people, but I'm assuming most people are going to be a little older that are watching this. Even if you're a younger kid, it's possible that you might have some concept of this, but as you get older, time goes faster. A year does not seem as long when you're 20-something as it did when you were 5. When you were 5, 3 days seemed like an eternity. So, as you get older and we have more experience of time, the expanses of time become relative to the amount of time that we've lived. So we've lived a long time, so each year relative to our existence seems very short. But as we get smaller and smaller and smaller, we go back in time to younger and younger, the time that we've experienced is shorter, so any time increment within that seems substantially longer. Now this is really important, and we can skip over the reincarnation idea, where when you reincarnate, you lose the memory because you have to relearn everything. Well, I guess now I'm not skipping it. It's an interesting idea that as we reincarnate, we forget because of the effort it takes to reestablish ourselves within a new body. The time scenario, the time reality or time perception that I'm talking about may also have a factor in that. But I don't mean to skip it, I just mean to say that at this point it's irrelevant, but it's something you can think about. Whether or not you believe that's even remotely possible. On the hard science end of things, where we're just looking at physical reality versus mental reality, we'll just leave it at the passage of time is based on your experience and perception of time. So, if when you're 5, a few days seems like forever, compared to compared to years going by quickly when you're, older, if we can imagine what it would be like then, from the moment that one is self-aware, or aware of surroundings, gaining, receiving sensory information and recording sensory information. From that moment, that first second, that very tiny moment of when perception begins and recording, I guess recording of events is really what our perception is based on, but how long those seconds must be by comparison. Every second must last seemingly forever at the very beginning. So, as we experience more and more time, the influence of those first few seconds is so much more dramatic at that point than possibly years later in our lives. So it's just to put an impact to an infant of how much they have become accustomed to their situation. So hours seem like forever. So to an infant, they cry and they're waiting for food to come or diaper change or whatever. They're used to that for their entire life. And if we scrunch down an 80-year-old's lifespan and we scrunch it down to equivalating what an infant feels like their life is, we may see some comparison there. It's kind of a strange thought to think of time passing that slow. I suppose some people who've done like isolation tanks or have done meditation, they may have a better grasp of these things where seconds stretch out. I know people who've taken acid definitely would have an appreciation of that time skew, and possibly be able to understand it better. But that passage of time is very warped, and therefore a child at that stage, their entire life, they're accustomed to being waited on. And this is where we start to move along to the importance of this. If you as an individual have been waited on hand and foot, for 10 years of your adult life, and then all of a sudden, let's say you're 20, we'll go with you're 20, and all of a sudden for the next 10 years, from 20 to 30, you've had somebody who's dressing you and feeding you and doing everything that you would normally do, and all you have to do is sit there and you can get up and move around whenever you want. But anytime there's anything difficult that needs to be done, they do it for you. Maybe they even wipe your ass, who knows. Then all of a sudden that gets taken away. That person dies and nobody else wants to take their place. It's going to take some getting used to, because you're going to become relatively helpless over that period of time. So when an infant is getting to be, not an infant anymore, but as you imagine the time stretch from the moment of being born to about 2 years old, when we start having real expectations of our children, which is, obviously the terrible twos, maybe we can understand a little bit better why those terrible twos happen. Because, you've been getting away with shit for, a lifetime, and now all of a sudden there's expectations of you. Maybe toilet training's beginning. I guess that's about all I will have for this time frame. But keep that in mind. The terrible twos will continue with that, and just the amount of time that we are cared for before we're expected to do anything for ourselves.